I was given a month to confess to a crime I didn't commit.
They called it an accident. That was the first lie. The crash happened in the middle of the afternoon on a road everyone used and no one feared. Clear weather, good visibility, no reason for disaster. And yet metal twisted, glass exploded, sirens screamed. My son walked away. My daughter-in-law walked away. I was the one they carried on a stretcher. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw wasn't a doctor. It was a police officer. He didn't ask if I was in pain. He asked if I remembered what I had done. That was when I knew something had already gone wrong. They said I had insisted on sitting in the front seat, that I had distracted my son, that I had grabbed the steering wheel. They said witnesses saw it. They said the marks on the road supported it. They said the damage pattern made sense. They said a lot of things. My son didn't look at me when they spoke. My daughter-in-law cried, softly, convincingly. I didn't speak, not because I was guilty, because I was trying to understand how the story had been written so quickly. By the time I was discharged, the narrative was complete. An elderly woman, confused, unstable, responsible. The evidence didn't leave room for doubt, not for the police, not for the insurance, not even for me. When the lawyer finally visited, he didn't offer hope. He offered time. 30 days, he said. That's all the court will allow. 30 days to prove I didn't cause the crash. 30 days to undo a story built from witnesses, reports, and silence. When he left, I sat alone in the hospital room. I replayed the moment before the impact. The sound, the timing, the way the car reacted, and I realized something important. If this had truly been an accident, they wouldn't have needed so much evidence. That was the moment I stopped trying to defend myself and started preparing to dismantle them. The evidence arrived before I did. By the time I was allowed to leave the hospital, reports had already been written, signed, and circulated. Neatly stacked conclusions waiting for a body to attach them to. Mine. The police file was thick, too thick for something that had happened in seconds. There were photographs of the road taken from careful angles, tire marks circled in red, measurements written in clean handwriting, a diagram showing the car's final position as if it had willingly stopped there. There were witness statements, 3 of them, all strangers, all confident. Each one said the same thing in slightly different words, that I had leaned forward, that my voice had been raised, that my hands had moved. It read like choreography. Even the medical report worked against me. Possible disorientation due to age, stress-induced confusion. No reliable memory of events immediately prior to impact. They didn't say I was lying. They said I couldn't be trusted. My lawyer sat across from me in a small room that smelled like old paper and disinfectant. He didn't touch the file at first. "Do you remember grabbing the wheel?" he asked. "No," I said. "Do you remember arguing?" "No." He nodded slowly, already writing. "Do you remember the impact clearly?" I paused. "Yes," I said, very clearly. That was the wrong answer. He looked up. "That's going to be difficult," he said carefully. "Selective memory isn't persuasive. Persuasive. That word came up often. The insurance company used it. The investigators used it. Even my own family used it. They didn't ask if I was innocent. They asked if I could convince anyone. My son visited once. He stood near the door, arms crossed, as if staying too long might trap him inside the room. "I don't know what happened," he said, staring at the floor. But everyone's saying the same thing. Everyone, not me. My daughter-in-law sat beside him, holding a tissue she didn't need. Her eyes were red in the right places. "You scared us," she said softly. "You should have said something earlier if you weren't feeling well." I watched her carefully. She didn't accuse, she suggested. The suggestions are harder to fight. When they left, the room felt smaller. That night, I asked for copies of everything, every report, every statement, every photograph. The nurse looked surprised. "Most people don't want to see that." "I do," I said. Back in my room, I spread the pages out on the bed. I read slowly, not like someone searching for innocence, like someone searching for structure. The same phrases repeated across different witness statements. The same timing down to the minute. The same assumption that the cause was human, not mechanical. And then I noticed something else. Not what was included, what was missing. No mention of sound, no description of braking, no account of what the car did before the wheel supposedly moved. Everything began with me. That was convenient. Too convenient. I closed the file and stared at the ceiling. For the first time, I allowed myself to understand the scale of what I was facing. I had no proof, no allies, no memory anyone believed, only 30 days. And a story so perfectly constructed that even I was expected to step inside it and disappear. That was when I made a decision. If the evidence was airtight, then someone had taken the time to seal it. And seals can be broken, not by force. By finding where the pressure was never meant to be applied. I didn't need to prove everything was false. I only needed to prove one thing didn't fit. And from that moment on, every day mattered. Because the clock wasn't just counting down to a verdict. It was counting down to whether the truth would survive being rushed. Silence turned against me faster than words ever could. In the days that followed, I learned how quickly a story becomes a verdict when no one interrupts it. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors avoided my eyes. Even the nurses spoke to me more slowly, as if volume could replace respect. I hadn't said I was innocent. That, apparently, was my mistake. People expect denial. They trust it more than restraint. Silence, to them, feels like strategy or confession. My son didn't visit again. Instead, his lawyer sent a message. Polite, distant, precise. It explained that, given the circumstances, it would be best if all communication went through legal channels. Legal channels don't carry tone. They don't ask how you're sleeping. They don't notice when your hands shake. They only move information forward. At home, when I was finally discharged, the house felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed, but because everyone else had. A neighbor crossed the street when she saw me. Another offered help I hadn't asked for, the kind that assumes weakness before it asks permission. I heard the whispers before I heard the facts. She grabbed the wheel. She panicked. At her age, it happens. Age became the explanation for everything, not evidence, not intent. Age, my lawyer called that evening. They're positioning you, he said, not as malicious, as unreliable. Which is worse? I asked. He didn't answer. The next day, a formal notice arrived, a temporary restriction. I was advised not to drive, not to be alone with children, not to make public statements. It wasn't punishment, it was containment. They weren't trying to prove I caused the crash. They were trying to make sure I couldn't contradict it. I sat at the kitchen table and read the notice twice. Then I placed it beside the police file. That was when I noticed something small. In every statement, every report, every summary, my name appeared last. After the witnesses, after the medical notes, after my son and daughter-in-law, as if I had been added later, as if the story had existed before I arrived in it. That night, I replayed the crash again, not the impact. The moment before, the car had drifted, not swerved. A smooth movement, controlled, almost practiced. Panic jerks, experience guides. I hadn't panicked. And if I hadn't panicked, then someone else had made a choice. The next morning, I wrote the first line in a new notebook. The silence is only dangerous if you let others define it. I decided then that I would not argue. I would not defend. I would observe. Because when everyone believes you are finished, they stop hiding their steps. And I only needed one of those steps to land in the wrong place. The clock said I had 27 days left. That was enough. The court didn't say it with cruelty. That's what made it worse. 30 days, the judge said calmly, looking down at the file instead of at me. After that, the findings will be finalized. Finalized, as if truth were a document that could expire. 30 days to prove I hadn't caused the crash. 30 days to undo a story already accepted by everyone who mattered. 30 days while every clock in the room seemed to agree I was already late. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited, not for answers, for confirmation. They asked the same question in different forms. Do you accept responsibility? Do you regret distracting the driver? Do you understand the danger you caused? I walked past them without speaking. Silence again. But this time it was intentional. At home, I marked the calendar, day 1. I didn't start by chasing witnesses or demanding new tests. That would have made sense to people who still believed the system was listening. Instead, I started with routine. I visited the road where the crash happened. Midday, same light, same traffic flow. I stood on the shoulder and watched cars pass. Most slowed slightly before the curve, not sharply. Not suddenly, just enough. I waited for a car like ours had been. Same model, same year. When one finally came, I watched closely. It didn't drift. It hugged the lane. That bothered me, because drift suggests assistance or absence. Something removed, something altered. I went back the next day. And the next, at different hours. Different speeds, different drivers. The pattern held. The road wasn't dangerous. It was predictable, which meant the crash hadn't come from surprise. It had come from preparation. On day 4, I requested the vehicle inspection report. They said it had already been completed. I asked for the raw data. They hesitated. Raw data doesn't lie easily. It's harder to interpret, but also harder to bend. That night, I thought about my son, about how he drove. Careful, methodical, always checking mirrors. He would never have lost control without warning. Unless the warning had been removed. By day 7, I realized something else. The timeline was wrong. The calls made after the crash, the order of emergency responses, the speed with which blame settled on me, too smooth, as if everyone had rehearsed their role. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the calendar. 7 days gone, 23 left. Most people would have felt panic. I felt clarity. Because pressure doesn't crush truth, it exposes shortcuts. And whoever had built this case had taken several. I just had to find the one they were counting on no one checking. Cars don't feel loyalty. They don't protect family. They don't keep secrets. They only remember what was done to them. That was why I went back to the inspection report, not the summary, not the conclusion. The pages no one reads unless they already doubt the ending. I requested the mechanical breakdown through my lawyer. He warned me not to expect much. Modern cars fail quietly, he said. Sometimes there's nothing to find. Sometimes, I replied, there's too much. The report arrived 3 days later. It was thin. That worried me more than a thick one ever could. I read it slowly, line by line, the way I used to read my children's schoolwork, not looking for mistakes but for effort. Tires, acceptable condition. Steering column, intact. Brake system, functional. Functional, not tested, not verified under load, just functional. There was a note at the bottom of the page, almost apologetic in tone. Due to post-impact damage, full brake diagnostics were inconclusive. Inconclusive. That word sat heavily on my chest. Because brakes don't become inconclusive unless something interrupts them before impact. I remembered the moment before the crash. Not fear, not shouting. The sound, a brief, hollow resistance. As if something had been pressed, but not fully answered. I called a retired mechanic I had known for years. He had fixed my car when my husband was still alive, back when machines were simpler and men trusted their hands more than software. I didn't tell him about the case. I asked him one question. What does it mean when brakes don't fail, but don't respond either? He was quiet for a long moment. It means something was changed, he said finally. Not broken, adjusted. Adjusted, that word changed everything. An adjustment isn't an accident, it's a decision. I asked another question. Could it be undone? Yes, he said, if you know where to look. But not by someone who wants it to stay hidden. That night, I looked at the photographs again, the underside of the car, the angles, the shadows, there it was, a missing fastener, small, almost polite, something that wouldn't draw attention unless you knew it belonged there. I circled it in red and placed the photo on the table. This wasn't proof yet, but it was direction. And direction matters more than certainty when time is limited. I checked the calendar. 15 days left, half my time gone. But for the first time since the crash, I wasn't chasing their story anymore. I was following the car S, and cars don't lie. They only show you who touched them last. Access is more important than motive. People argue about why something happened. I needed to know who could have done it and when. The car had been serviced 2 weeks before the crash. That detail had been mentioned casually, almost proudly, during the early interviews. Regular maintenance, my daughter-in-law had said. We take good care of our things. Good care leaves records. I asked for them. The service receipt showed routine checks. Oil, fluids, tire pressure, nothing unusual, which is exactly what made it unusual. Because a missing fastener doesn't disappear during routine service. It disappears when someone wants it gone. I drove to the service center myself, not with accusation. With curiosity, the manager recognized the car immediately. Accidents tend to do that. We didn't touch the brakes, he said quickly before I even asked. I know, I replied. I'm not here about the brakes. That confused him. I asked to see the service bay logs. Who worked on the car? What time it arrived? Who else was present? There was a pause, then hesitation, then honesty. The car was here longer than the receipt shows, he admitted. Your son asked if he could use the bay for a bit. Said he wanted to check something himself. My stomach tightened, but my voice didn't. Did you let him? I asked. Yes, he said. He's done it before, we trust him. Trust again. It always comes back to trust. I thanked him and left. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and let the information settle. My son had access. Alone, unsupervised, unrecorded. That didn't make him guilty. But it destroyed the illusion that no one could have touched the car. I thought about timing. The service center visit, the crash. The witness statements. Everything aligned neatly. Too neatly. That evening, I reviewed the witness list again. One name stood out, a man who claimed he had seen me grab the wheel. He worked nearby. I visited the building the next morning. Security guards remember faces. I showed them his name. One of them frowned. He doesn't work mornings, the guard said, only evenings. The crash happened at noon. I wrote that down, not as proof, as fracture. By the end of the day, I had 3 fractures. The service bay access, the missing fastener. The witness who couldn't have been there. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they meant pressure. And pressure forces truth out of hiding. I checked the calendar again. 14 days left, half the month gone. But the story was no longer airtight. It was cracking, and cracks don't need force. They need time. Cracks make noise, not loudly. Nervously, I didn't announce what I had found. I let it exist. And almost immediately, the story began to adjust itself. The first sign was a phone call. My son called after weeks of silence. His voice was softer than I remembered, careful in a way that suggested rehearsal. I've been thinking, he said. Maybe some details were misunderstood. Misunderstood. That word doesn't appear until someone feels movement beneath their feet. I spoke to the service center, I replied calmly. A pause. What about it? He asked. They mentioned you had access to the car, I said. Another pause, longer this time. I just checked the fluids, he said. You know how I am, I like to be sure. Sure people don't leave parts loose, I didn't argue. Arguments invite repair. Instead, I nodded into the phone as if he could see me. That makes sense, I said. Relief travels fast. 2 days later, an updated witness statement appeared in the file. Same witness, same story, different wording, cleaner, more cautious. He no longer said he saw me grab the wheel. Now he said it looked like I moved. Looked like. That's what stories do when they're wounded. They soften. I went back to the building where the witness supposedly worked. This time, I didn't ask questions, I watched. He arrived at 4 in the afternoon. Left just before midnight, never at noon. I took photographs of the entry log board, not the names, just the schedule. Then I waited. 3 days later, my lawyer called. They've asked to revisit the mechanical report, he said. Someone requested an addendum. People don't reopen reports unless something forces them to. I knew what had, not my voice, my patience. The pressure wasn't coming from accusation, it was coming from inconsistency. And inconsistencies make professionals nervous. That evening, my daughter-in-law came by, unannounced. She sat across from me, hands folded tightly. We didn't mean for this to get so complicated, she said. Complicated is what people call lies when they grow. I just want this to end, she added. So do I replied. She looked up, startled. For a moment, her face forgot its expression. Then she said something she didn't mean to, then stopped digging. There it was, not denial, fear. I smiled gently. I'm not digging, I said. I'm waiting. That was when I saw it. The story wasn't defending itself anymore. It was trying to heal. And healing leaves scars. I chose one detail and let it surface. Just one. Not the missing fastener, not the service bay access, not even the shifting witness statement. Those were too sharp. They would have caused panic. Instead, I let something smaller bleed through. The timeline. I asked my lawyer to submit a simple request. A clarification of the exact minute the crash was reported and the exact minute the first witness call was logged. No accusations, no commentary, just time. Time is dangerous when people build stories quickly. The response came faster than expected. Too fast. The witness call was logged before the emergency system registered the crash, by 3 minutes. At first, they called it a clerical error. Those happen, so I asked for the phone records, not content, not identity, just timestamps. The witness had called from a landline. A landline inside the building where he worked. The same building whose security logs showed he wasn't there at noon. That was the scar, small, precise, impossible to ignore. I didn't circulate it. I let the institutions see it one by one. The insurance adjuster went quiet. The investigator asked for a meeting. The judge requested an update. Stories don't collapse all at once. They sag. My son stopped calling entirely. My daughter-in-law sent a message that said only one word, please. I didn't answer. The mechanic called next. He had been asked to clarify his earlier comment. They wanted me to say it could have happened naturally, he said. I didn't. Good. By the end of the week, the case file had grown thicker, but not stronger. Addendums stacked on top of corrections. Corrections layered over assumptions. The original certainty was gone. I sat at my table that night and marked the calendar again. 7 days left. For the first time, the deadline wasn't pressing me. It was pressing them. Because now the question wasn't whether I could prove I was innocent. It was whether they could still explain why the story no longer fit together. They didn't argue with the timeline. They tried to remove it. The request came quietly, filed as a correction. A revised report, an updated sequence of events. No announcement, no explanation. Just a cleaner version of the same story. That's how I knew it mattered. My lawyer called me early in the morning. "They've submitted an amended witness statement," he said, "and a supplemental mechanical note." "Does it fix the problem?" I asked. He paused. "It tries to." The witness now claimed he had used a mobile phone, not a landline. The time discrepancy had been narrowed to seconds. The building logs were described as approximate. Approximate is what truth becomes when it's under threat. I asked to see the documents. The handwriting was different. Not the words, the pressure, rushed, uneven, defensive. I had seen that before. People write carefully when they're lying the first time. They rush when they're trying to escape the lie. I noticed something else. The amended statement was signed after my timeline request had been filed. Too late. You can't correct what has already been questioned without explaining why it needed correction. I asked my lawyer to do nothing. "No objections," I said. "No rebuttal." He was surprised. "If we don't respond, they'll think I'm tired," I said. "Let them." Silence again. But this time, silence had context. 3 days later, a new development arrived uninvited. The witness withdrew his statement entirely. No reason given, no apology, just absence. Stories hate absence. Without the witness, the narrative lost its anchor. The insurance company requested a pause. The court scheduled a review hearing. The mechanical report was flagged for independent evaluation. Everything slowed. And when things slow, people make mistakes. That evening, my son came to the house, not with confidence, with urgency. "They're asking questions I can't answer," he said. "You don't understand what this is doing." "I understand exactly," I replied. He stepped closer. "We can still stop this." "We," that word again. "How?" I asked. He lowered his voice. "By agreeing it was shared fault." Shared fault. A soft confession disguised as compromise. I looked at him for a long moment. "You're afraid," I said calmly. "That's new." He said nothing because he knew. Once a story begins to erase its own scars, it no longer looks like truth. It looks like survival. And survival doesn't hold up in court. The court didn't ask me to speak that day. That's how I knew the balance had shifted. The review hearing was brief, procedural on paper, but the room felt different. No assumptions, no shortcuts, just people listening for what no longer aligned. The independent evaluator spoke first, not confidently, carefully. The mechanical adjustment observed could not have occurred during normal operation, he said. It required deliberate access. Deliberate, That word landed heavily. The judge looked down at the file, then up at my son. "When did you last have unsupervised access to the vehicle?" she asked. My son hesitated. Seconds matter in moments like that. 2 weeks before the incident, he said finally, during routine service. Routine, the service manager testified next. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. He asked to use the bay alone, he said. We allowed it. We trusted him. Trust again. The witness issue followed. The withdrawn statement, the altered timeline, the attempt to revise records after questions were raised. Patterns emerged, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "You're no longer defending yourself." He was right, I was. The court wasn't asking if I was innocent anymore. It was asking who had benefited from my guilt. The judge ordered a temporary suspension of the findings, not a verdict, a pause, but pauses are dangerous for lies. Outside the courtroom, reporters turned their questions, not toward me, toward my son and daughter-in-law. I walked past them without stopping. At home that evening, I marked the calendar again. 3 days left. 3 days, and the truth had stopped needing my voice. The call came late at night. That alone told me it wasn't official. Official things arrive during business hours. What arrives after dark is usually fear. My daughter-in-law's voice was calm but too careful, each word chosen like it might be recorded. "We need to talk," she said, privately. I didn't ask where. People who want silence always choose neutral places. We met in a small cafe near the edge of town, the kind of place that closes early and doesn't ask questions. She was already there, sitting straight, hands folded, eyes tired. She didn't order anything. "I never wanted it to go this far," she said immediately. Far. As if the truth had wandered off on its own. "I just wanted things to be easier," she continued, "for all of us." I listened. When people try to erase something, they start by shrinking it. "The accident happened so fast," she said. "No one planned anything. We just reacted badly." I watched her hands. They trembled when she said accident. They went still when she said planned. "There are people who can help make this stop," she said next. "The findings, the attention, the damage. Help, another word people use when they mean control. All it takes," she added, "is your agreement. No more questions, no more digging." "And what happens to the truth?" I asked. She looked at me then, really looked. "The truth," she said quietly, "doesn't always help anyone." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about protecting my son anymore. It was about protecting themselves from consequence. "You already tried to erase me once," I said calmly. "On paper, now you want to erase the story." She swallowed. "This could destroy our family," she whispered. "No," I replied. "What you did already did that." She reached across the table. "Please," I stood. "I was given a month," I said. "Not to survive, to be silenced. I chose differently." I left her there. The next morning, my lawyer called. "They've requested a sealed settlement," he said. Full closure, no admissions. I laughed quietly. They were still trying to disappear the truth. But truth doesn't vanish when you stop talking about it. It waits. The final day arrived without ceremony. No countdown, no warning, just a date quietly turning into another. The courtroom was full, but the noise was gone. No whispers, no confident glances, only the sound of paper being handled carefully as if everyone understood that what they held could no longer be reshaped. The judge spoke slowly, not for drama, for accuracy. The independent findings were entered into the record. The amended statements were rejected. The withdrawn testimony was noted not as absence, but as evidence of pressure. Then came the conclusion no one had prepared for. The court ruled that the original determination of fault was invalid, not questionable, not uncertain, invalid. The words hung in the air longer than any accusation ever had. I was cleared, formally, completely. But the room didn't react to that, because the focus had already shifted. The judge looked directly at my son and my daughter-in-law. "This court finds sufficient cause," she said, "to refer this matter for further investigation into deliberate interference, false testimony, and obstruction." No one cried, no one shouted. My daughter-in-law stared at the table. My son closed his eyes, not in relief, but in realization. The story they had built to save themselves had turned into a record they could not escape. Outside the courtroom, cameras waited. This time, they weren't pointed at me. I walked past them slowly, without answering questions. At home, I removed the calendar from the wall. 30 days had passed. Not because I fought harder, not because I spoke louder, because I waited longer than lies can survive. That evening, I sat by the window as the sun went down, the house quiet in a way that finally felt honest. People later asked me how I managed it. How I proved my innocence with so little time, so little power. I told them the truth. I didn't try to outrun the lie, I said. I let it run out of room. Justice didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like a door opening that should never have been closed. And when it did, I didn't step forward. I simply stayed where I had always been, standing in the truth,